Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll get my camera back up here. We will now convene the Committee of the Whole agenda for Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. My name is Tim McGonigal. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole. And first of all, I would like to recognize with dignity and respect that the CBRD is on the unceded territories of the Quw'utsun, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Snaminas, Layaxan, Pakwichan, Dididot, and Pachidot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. Well, welcome today to Alternate Director Olive. Thank you for joining us. And today is Administrative Assistants and Professionals Day, so appreciation to all the administrative assistants and professionals in the room joining us today. It is also International Guide Dog Day. Just so you're aware, there is a celebration for every day of the year. Pretty soon it's going to be Chairs Day, and I would expect some accolades upon that day. Ms. Harrison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item on the agenda is adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of April 10th, 2024 be adopted.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Toporowski. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Director Toporowski, please.
Mr. Chair, there was a message from Sierra online saying that she can't hear us.
We will clarify that up at the podium directly. Can you hear us now, Director Acton? Well, we can't hear her either then. Ms. Harrison. Can you hear us, Ian? Yes. Great.
Can hear you now.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, we won't go there. Director Harrison. Oh, I've just demoted you. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is public input period. Would you like me to read the...
You know the rules, don't you? Please adhere to the rules that were not read out this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. It's Kim Bernard, Shawnigan Lake, Area B, Isquale, Siemna Siea. Thank you so much, everyone, for this opportunity and this safe, respectful space to offer my public input. So today I'd like to speak specifically to R3 and R4. So R3 with the Respectful Spaces bylaw is a really important work, but I'm concerned because there's no provision here under communication considerations. So once again, I'm reaching out to ask, or actually to advocate for the importance of co-creating this type of expectation, because it has to be a two-way street. It has to work well and be seamless with not only what's coming at us from the directives and the bylaws, but as a member of the public, we also can offer our best practices, what we find safe and welcoming. And I come here week after week because I have found that the system of outreach at the local level is challenging. I actually face a shut door most of the time. And so I come here so that I can give, I think, a fair, equitable public input experience on a wide range of topics, and also to learn what some of the issues are at a regional level. So that's what I'd like to say about that. And then R4, I represent a service club in the community that does work that engages the whole community in cleanups. We build momentum. You'll hear about that this afternoon with our Adopt an Area program. But our service club doesn't actually qualify for regional grants and aid because we are not a registered nonprofit society. We're not required to be as a Rotary Club. And yet we are able to do good work in the community, and we'd like to expand that. So for example, safety shirts for our volunteers is really important, as you know, with the speeds in Shawnigan Lake and those issues. But we'd also just like to be able to show that we're working collaboratively and closely with our local government. So I really appreciate the opportunity to give this feedback, and I hope that that will be considered when these guidelines are revisited. Thank you.
Thank you for your input this morning. Appreciate that. Ms. Harrison?
There's still time. Is there anyone else that?
I don't see anyone else in the public. Anyone else? Nope, they're not lined up at the door, so
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving then to information items. The first item is IN1, which is a notice from UBCM regarding a call for resolution topics, and the CAO has a verbal report, and this is for direction.
welcome the CAO to the podium.
Morning. So this is a little bit early in the schedule, but we do have the UBCM convention coming up in September, as we all know. AVICC just passed, and so this item has come now through a couple of recommendations from committee to have a conversation about the advocacy that you'd like to bring forwards to the convention. They are accepting resolutions up until June 15th. And so typically, most issues will go through the local area association, but that doesn't preclude you from submitting something of significance to the UBCM convention for consideration as well. We also expect that the ministers' meeting requests will be open up in the summer like they usually are, so there's a couple of different things to consider. The other thing I'll just note is there has been a lot of advocacy ongoing just during the year, and so a couple of things that we're working on. There was direction from Electoral Area Services to write a letter and request a meeting to the Minister of Transportation regarding the roads issues in the south, and we're focusing on Shawnigan in particular. So that will move forwards. There's also, staff have been supporting in drafting a letter to Minister Callan. This is going to come from the mayors in the region based on a meeting that happened in the past few weeks to discuss need for support, financial support primarily for emergency warming center location. And so we are putting that together, and so that will be another request for a meeting and financial support. You'll also recall from UBCM last year, we did have some success in the advocacy work at the convention, and we received a grant from the Municipal Affairs for the South Cowichan Governance Study. So we have had some success in the work we've been doing around advocacy. The last thing I'll touch on is just that there in your corporate strategic plan, there are a number of advocacy items that you have prioritized, and so section 6 talks about a need to advocate to senior levels of government on items that the board feels are impacting achievement of local government objectives in the Cowichan Valley. And the items listed are pertaining to watershed management, watershed protection, private managed forest lands, Vancouver Island land use planning, land use decision making, emergency and disaster debt management, and a renewed fiscal framework for local governments. So maybe I'll pause there, just providing a little bit of context. And so this is kind of for direction regarding what resolutions you might want to consider, so staff have time to prepare and bring those back drafted, and also just an early discussion about maybe what meetings you'd like to request.
Just before I turn to my fellow directors, I know that as municipalities, we will do the same within our bodies and bring forward what we feel would be appropriate. Personally, I know we have in the past as a board brought forward the option for approving authority within regional districts. I think that is another option that should be pursued, given some of the discussions that occurred at AVICC on the needs for housing and the pauses that are caused within regulatory frameworks. So that would be one thing. I know we've done it before, but until it's implemented, I think it should be continued. Director Segal, I hope you agree.
I do. I also just wanted to suggest being in touch with the RDN CAO because him and the chair of RDN are really moving this legislative reform piece forward. And so if there's an opportunity for a collaborative motion from all the regional districts in the province, I want us to do that.
I'll pause so you can write those down. Director Douglas, I have. Anyone else while I'm looking around? Dr. Nicholson, I got you next.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe our strategic plan in terms of advocacy does mention the private managed forest lands. And the committee may recall that, I believe it was in 2018, the province initiated a review of the private managed forest lands program. The Cowichan Valley Regional District did provide a submission as part of the engagement process around that, as did many other local governments. The Cowichan Watershed Board did provide a submission as well. What many of us have observed is that with the greater focus on some of the issues related to old growth, the province has really focused their attention on that area and not as much on making some potential changes to the private managed forest lands program. So I would suggest to the board that we try to get a meeting with the forest minister to get a update on what the government's plans are with the potential reforms, the private managed forest lands program, and to go over not only our submission, but also that of the Cowichan Watershed Board as well.
Yes, Ms. Miles Wilson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to respond to the director's proposal there, which we can definitely follow up on. But we did speak about this at, or we actually submitted a resolution to the last UBCM as the CVRD. The response from the minister's office was that regarding our request to receive more financial support around taxation related to private managed forest lands, is that they're currently undertaking a water security strategy which aims to address issues primarily around impacts to drinking water in watersheds. Once that's complete, the water security strategy, that is, they will be moving forward with a second phase of the private managed forest lands review. So those are two things that they've committed to, and at that time they would be looking at policy and program, potentially new or amendments to the one they have. So happy to request a meeting. Just wanted to put that into a little bit of context with how they've responded.
No, for sure. I think an update would be appropriate as well as to where they are within that process. That concludes, Director Douglas. Thank you. I have Director Nicholson and then Director Morrison online.
Thank you. Yes, I think that private managed forest land one we need to continue to pursue because it's really important, and a promise of picking up the review, which was started in 2018, seems like a long way off. My issue is I think we need some sort of a motion, a resolution around upping provincial enforcement, following through and more proactive provincial enforcement on some of our egregious environmental infractions.
Thank you for that. You got that? Perfect. Director Morrison online, please.
Thank you. And I don't know if anyone has been reading the chat, but it's the sound coming from directors' microphones is almost unintelligible. So don't know if that could be fixed. Apparently Director Acton's having the same issue, and it's probably for other people online as well. I just want to bring a little bit of sort of context as to the how the resolutions are reviewed. Those that were at AVICC saw the resolutions package, and that, if you didn't know, was reviewed and processed through UBCM as well. And I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that, yeah, we should fire some ideas towards our CAO, and know that there's so much duplication in the resolutions that are submitted. That's why the blocks have been created. I can tell you that it's at the UBCM level, the quality of the responses that we've been getting on issues that have been submitted multiple times is quite short from the province. So I'm just going to suggest that we look at the issues that have been that haven't been addressed, that are new and emerging, and that are impactful to our communities, and that there be more focus on that, because I'm just seeing how much effort that we have staff put into the creation of these resolutions that will, in a lot of cases, unless they're relatively new or emergent or have never been addressed before, usually just end up in a block and voted on as a block. That's all, thanks.
Thank you for that, Director Morrison. I have Director Martman. Are the microphones any better now?
This might not be a microphone issue. This might be.
It sounds like it's all going through the main lectern.
Okay, bear with us while we try to rectify the sound quality. Sound check, how's that online now?
The lectern sounds great. It's the individual director's mic, so maybe a couple of directors test their
Testing.
mics. That would help.
Testing, testing. How's that? I can't make myself sound any smarter, though. I'm maxed out.
Carry on, Director Martman, you had,
Thank you, Chair.
You're
And
welcome.
I'm not sure, this one is something that sort of came up through discussion at committee around the ownership of the lake bottoms across the CVRD, and wondering if that's a Ministry of Forestry of interest, just to sort of, or under, a subset of the Ministry of Forestry to say, is there a way, or is there an interest to work with the CVRD to own the lake bottoms?
That's a big, complicated one. So I've noted it, and I will have to kind of compile and come back with some information.
I think it would possibly be a multi-jurisdictional issue as well, would it not? Federally and provincially? Given the ENN land grant and those properties. So, yeah, it would be a complicated issue for sure. Okay, looking around one more time just for some ideas. And I think this is just the preamble. There'll be more opportunities. Professor Justice, Director Justice, please.
It's not a, thank you, Mr. Chair, it's not an idea in particular, but I was just looking through the advocacy, some of the things listed in our strat plan around advocacy, and note that watershed management and water protection funding are on that list, so I think it would be a general category in which we could look at developing something.
And just to clarify Director Douglas's point, he was looking for a minister's meeting on that issue, not a resolution.
Sorry, just for clarity around the private managed forest lands, that item?
Please.
Yeah, and not to overcomplicate it, but if you look back at the submissions that were made when the province was undertaking their public engagement around the private managed forest lands program, there were many other regional districts that raised similar concerns to us. So not to overcomplicate it by inviting, 1 million people to a minister's meeting, but if we can demonstrate that our regions are united in this, it could have an impact.
Appreciate the clarity there. Looking around, I see no more input. I'm looking online. Thank you, Ms. Miles Wilson. Ms. Harrison, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item under reports is Item R1, which is a report from Emergency Management Cowichan regarding the Emergency Warming Center, Winter 2023-24 Summary Report, and that is for information.
Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Chair and Directors. You have the report in front of you. A very brief summary of the summary report. The emergency response to provide overnight warming to Cowichan's most vulnerable residents over this winter can be quantified as 42 nights between December the 12th and May the 31st, where the center was open. There were a number of nights in there where our contractor, Lookout, was able to add some extra staff and increase our capacity from 20 to 30. You'll notice as you go through the numbers in front of you that there were only, I believe, 2 nights where the center was not at full capacity and there were not turnaways. Turnaways were managed by opening up the vestibule area and allowing people to warm up to a level that protected life safety, but were not able to be accommodated in the warming center itself. Over those 42 nights, there were 44 nights where the center would have been open according to weather criteria. 2 of those nights we were unable to open because of staff constraints, either with ourselves or with our contractor not being able to field the staff. And on those nights, people were outside in the cold. We can also see that close to 1,000 person nights of sheltering and warming were provided by this emergency response for this winter, which I think reinforces what you all see in the community, which this is an area of great need.
I'm sure there will be a few questions on that if you're done there. I have Director Justice, Director Douglas, and Director Segal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you've touched on this, but I guess I'm curious about what the underlying factors are and resulting in people getting turned away, the capacity issue. So, what factors are determining capacity other than what you've mentioned, which is just the number of staff scheduled for a given evening? Were people turned away simply because of staffing decisions, or is it capacity within the ability to provide staff?
Yeah, through the chair to the director, there are a number of factors there. Essentially, it was about the sort of best practice safe established ratio of staff to clients to ensure that as a low barrier shelter, low barrier warming space, there is a ratio that's sort of accepted to ensure that our contractors meet their own internal occupational and health and safety requirements. And that really was the guide. Just like many services, our contractor and even our own staff, there were a number of illnesses over the course of the winter period that unexpectedly reduced the availability of staff. A related issue, and this is broadly related to this being an emergency response attached to weather criteria, is it's difficult. We experienced this with the need to schedule overtime for staff on nights when the shelter wasn't open. The same is true when folks are out recruiting new staff to actually work within the warming space, which is they can't guarantee them sort of between, for these 4 months that they're going to be working a set schedule. So these folks all either worked overtime or were working other jobs. So it's an issue with the way that the province has structured the eligibility criteria around these services predominantly. We do know that bringing in Lookout allowed us to rely on their best practice expertise. So when we say turn away, we mean that there was still some allowance for that life safety provision of folks coming in, warming up for 45 minutes, an hour, maybe a couple times a night, but they were not sort of welcomed into the space with the knowledge that they could stay there all night out of the cold.
Thank you. And if I
Follow up?
might just briefly, so the space itself wasn't ever a capacity issue. It was staffing only.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if we can just ensure that when we're speaking into our mics for our people at home, that we're close to our microphones so they can hear us online. I have Director Douglas, Segal, Wilson, and Nicholson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the report mentions there was about 1,000 people nights of use of the overnight warming center. Do we have a sense of how many unique individuals this included? Rough estimate?
I would say we'd probably be looking at our last point in time count for that, which is somewhere north of 200. We do know sort of anecdotally, people aren't providing an ID when they come in, and there's not that tracking of did X person come 1 or 12 nights. But anecdotally, we can say from speaking with our contractor that this year saw a lot more people who are in that precariously housed position. So folks that are living in cars and who are not perhaps who are reticent to seek out services on all but the coldest nights. So I think that from speaking with Lookout at our after action review, it was communicated that there was a lot more of those folks, folks that are employed but are unhoused.
Okay, moving to Director Segal.
Thank you. Are we sure that even if I'm close to the microphones, the people at home can hear me any better?
Apparently IT is working on it. They're troubleshooting, according to the chat.
Okay. So I don't really have any questions. I just have like a little mini speech. I just want to express such deep gratitude to the exceptional work that you and your team have done this winter. Your dedication to providing crucial services to the most vulnerable members of our community is not just commendable, but to me, a moral imperative. Regarding the section of the report that's mentioned significant reputational impacts to the CVRD, I would suggest reframing that. Like, while there were some vocal individuals that expressed negative sentiments, I'd like to just remember that there is a silent majority that really firmly supports the fundamental human right to shelter. I think all the staff at emergency your department, Lookout Housing, the Couch and Community Center staff, and those significant efforts they did this winter deserve recognition and applause for their life-saving service. It's undoubtedly challenging and very costly, but it exemplifies our community's commitment to fostering a culture of compassion and care across the Cowichan Valley. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Well said. How about a round of applause? That's why you're the vice chair. Moving through my list, I have Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ryan. And I'm going to repeat what, but not quite so eloquently, what Director Segal said. Thank you for that. That's great. I'm looking at the numbers for minors here, and it says 19 and under. Has there been, and I understand if you can't answer this question, has there been any really young minors, and I'm talking about the 13, 14-year-olds, and is there a point where, if there have been any, you've had to say, we can't take you in, and called another organisation?
So minors, in reference to the numbers as we've presented them, means people who are in their late teens.
Okay.
Folks younger than that, if they are unhoused, tend not to come to these spaces. There are some spaces available within the community,
Okay.
and some organizations that work specifically with unhoused youth. We do know that the need is probably higher, but in terms of what Lookout is able to operate under their own policies and I believe some regulations, when we're talking about a minor, we're talking about under 19,
Okay.
but 18 to 19.
Okay.
So those late teens.
But the other organisations are out there to help the younger ones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have heard from our partner organizations that there is a greater need than there is availability of space.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, if I could make a suggestion that perhaps one of those organisations could come in tandem with our emergency to address that younger population, which I know very little about, so they can bring us up to date on that one.
through to EMS, I'm sure that could be accommodated at a future meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Chair, if I could, just one more comment. We have had the opportunity to do a sort of operational after-action review, which we do after every emergency response. Some of the lessons that we learned this year was that working with Lookout to add in a daytime outreach worker for the area around the Cowichan Community Center went a long way to not eliminate, but to reduce some of the sort of the patron and public conflict that was happening around there. Also, quite late in the game, later than we should have, we were able to work with the Cowichan Community Center, HR, and our wellness coordinator here to provide some harm reduction training to staff. I think that, I hope that from Rob, who's following me, that was enormously valuable to understanding the people that the warming center was helping and their circumstances of life. And Lookout delivered that, and they are willing to deliver that more broadly in order to, if we decide that that's a need for our staff.
Appreciate that. I have Director Nicholson and the Director Martman.
Thank you. First of all, I've had a couple of texts from the public who are hearing us just fine. I find the number thing has got me all confused. People per night, like I'm assuming like for January 2024, there's 463 people took advantage of the, is that what that means?
Yes.
So that's the number of people. So is that like on an average night, you would have about 22 people in there?
So our capacity as we moved into the first opening on December the 12th and throughout was set at 2 staff. That was what Lookout could guarantee. So that means an interior overnight capacity of 20 folks who were warming. There was that period in January where things got very cold. We did boost that up to 30, and I believe on one night to 40, based on available staff or folks coming in to work a double shift.
So when it was 40, were there 40 people there?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a better indicator of, yeah.
Yeah, there were only 2 nights where it was not at capacity.
So I guess my question is probably to Ms. Miles Wilson is, should we be adding to the advocacy thing to the province about improving their eligibility criteria for emergency centers? Yeah, I think that sounds like we should be doing that.
That has been approved to put that forward as another topic through our CAO. Thank you. Does that conclude, Director Nicholson? Thank you. Director Martman?
Over here, Chair, thank you.
Busy writing and watching. But go ahead, please. I'm listening intently.
Yeah, thank you, staff. And I think really just I wanted to sort of dive down into the turnaways. And can you sort of go over the process is it they line up at the door and once you get a number, you cut them off, or is there vulnerability aspects that you look at, age aspects, that type of thing?
Yeah, sort of given the resources available and the fact that this is a warming center and not a shelter, developing the kind of relationship in advance with patrons was not possible this year under this model. So it was first come, first served. We did have security there who were able to more or less manage things like line jumpers or things like that. But yeah, it was the first 20, 30, or 40, depending on the staffing level for that evening. Those folks would be welcomed in, and then other folks would then be managed through that lobby warming process.
Follow up?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if there is a best practice if we have something sort of planned in the future to identify the most vulnerable, or is that just impossible?
It's a tricky position as an emergency response. I think that, the options available, a temporary winter shelter, an emergency warming or warming response shelter, perhaps those might have the ability to understand the clientele a little bit more easily. But as an emergency response warming center, really when we read the guidelines from EMCR, this is the doors are open, come on in to the capacity that you can safely be managed.
One more and then you're done.
So do you have any advice that you would provide in terms of if you have to stay within those parameters of basically first in line, so that no one gets turned away? How would you sort of approach that?
It becomes a resourcing issue. And if we're speaking globally, then I would say it has to do with the eligibility criteria being tied to weather.
Thank you very much. Looking for first-time speakers before I move to Director Wilson for a second time. Director Wilson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think this, to a certain extent, and our COO can answer this one probably, as we were talking about UBCM resolutions. One of the things, obviously, that we struggle with is finding space and funding. Is there a resolution that we are preparing as far as asking the province for more funding? And if there's not, could we add that on, do you think? You know, i.e. give us the money?
We did pen a letter to the appropriate ministers requesting sufficient funding to accommodate the needs within our region.
Okay, and is it worth bringing that forward to UBCM as well, again, as a backup?
It is entirely up to this body. We could probably do a ministers' meeting would be more appropriate in my view.
That would be useful.
Listening to the impacts that have been provided by this service. And I want to echo the thanks from our community of Lake Cowichan as well, because we know it's not just a core issue, that it's a region issue. And to show the compassion with the limited availability that we have, I think is kudos to everyone involved.
Yeah.
Yourself, staff at the Cowichan Community Center, and Lookout. I applaud what we were able to do with the limited resources that we did have. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and that the key phrase there that is the limited resources that we're given. We need more if they expect us to do more. And thank you again, Ron.
Thank you.
And I apologize for cutting you off, Director Wilson, but that was my passion. Okay, anything else? So I think Kate Segal still wins the speech award. Yep. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Moving on. Did AI write that? Hey, easy now. Careful. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R2 is a report from the Cowichan Community Center regarding community services regarding Cowichan Community Center Temporary Emergency Warming Center, EWC, debrief.
And I did not mean to not include you, sir. So thanks to you as well as the oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the committee, we committed as Community Services to also bring a report at the conclusion of the Emergency Warming Center for the Cowichan Community Center impacts. So there is a second report. There's obviously some duplication between the first two reports, but if there's specific questions for Community Services or for the author and the manager of the Cowichan Community Center, Rob Williams, we'd be open to those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I have Director Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And so there's obviously been some impacts, but this is really a point of clarification on one particular impact. So in the report, it says that one of the impacts was the necessity to close off and fence the pedestrian access between the community center and Vine Street. But my memory of that was that that decision actually was made on the 30th of November before the warming center was in operation, and it related to the use of Vine Street as a corridor between the community center and the warming cooling center on Garden Street. Isn't that correct?
If I may, Mr. Chair. That is correct. We did see an increase in incidents or loitering in the area once the warming center was opened up in that area. So it did add to the challenges in that area.
Thanks, that's all.
That's it? Okay. Any further questions? Director Martman, please.
So I was trying to do marry the first report with this report and try to compare numbers to dollars, numbers of people. Is that fair to do this with this, between those two reports? 'Cause I was trying to get a dollar cost per night per person.
We did not calculate a cost per night per person. Yeah, Steph could take that away if you wish, but that has not been calculated.
Because I roughly got it around $150.
Unless Ryan has done it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're just in the process this week of gathering all the invoices, combining those and building our claim for the province. And once we're done that, I will be able to return both the total cost as well as the cost to the CVRD. And then we can calculate sort of total cost to the CVRD per person per night.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, that sometimes it's difficult for a direct correlation because some of those expenses were with the anticipated number of incidents increasing, some capital improvements to improve the overall situation. So a direct correlation may be difficult, but I defer to Ryan for that answer. Thanks.
Great. Looking around, Director Segal.
Again, not a question, but I'm passionate about this topic. And what I want to highlight is like the investment, I think, that's needed in our Cowichan Community Center staff. They have become frontline workers in this situation. And I think whether the Emergency Warming Center is at the CCC again next year or not, the unhoused situation is not going anywhere. And people that have, signed up for jobs that they think are just, checking in to see a theater performance or to the arena are going to be dealing with our most vulnerable people in the community and the challenges that come with that. So I just want to commend your visionary leadership through this. I know this has been so hard, and I hope that we can honor the staff that have been bearing the brunt of this with appropriate training. To continue to create this culture of care that cares for all and doesn't sacrifice staff in being put in a position they're not prepared for adequately.
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Director Segal. Very important points raised there. For those in attendance at the Cowichan North Recreation Commission meeting yesterday, we heard that there's an increasing situation at the Frank Jameson Community Center as well. So it's not just in the core area. I've heard from the chair some concerns in the lake area as well. So yes, it is a problem or a situation that we're dealing with right across the region. Thank you.
Looking around for any more input? On behalf of myself and the board, please extend our extreme gratitude to the staff at the CCC for all of their support during this difficult time. Appreciate that. Please send that along from us.
Will do. Thank you.
Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is item R3, which is a report from Cowichan Community Center, Community Services Department regarding proposed CVRD Respectful Spaces bylaw, and there is a recommendation before you.
Yes, Director Douglas. You're moving it, and Director Segal is seconding it. Yes, Director Nicholson.
I have a question.
Absolutely, please fire away.
I am supportive of this motion, but I would also like to understand that a member of the public made comment on the provision for communication and that this is really something that we have to work with the community to develop. So I'm wondering how that will be tackled.
Fair question. Through to you, Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Nicholson. I also heard the public input, and the point raised around that would obviously increase the time to bring the bylaw back for board consideration, as well as potentially some of the expense around public engagement that I don't have those figures in front of me at this point. So we can certainly take that away and provide more information on that. Yeah, this is definitely a work in progress.
Follow up?
Yeah, I actually think it's really important to do it like that because this is becoming an increasing problem and the community needs to understand that and why we're doing it and to be a part of it. So I really do support that.
Thank you, and I think what was mentioned, respect is a two-way street. It's not given, it's earned. So within this, I think we're trying to find a respectful spot for all, regardless of your viewpoint and your situation. So, Director Justice?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that creating a respectful and safe environment is obviously very important. I just have some questions about the, I don't know, maybe it's like the appropriateness of a bylaw, but especially in this case, the financial considerations of developing a bylaw. The report says that that aside from staff time, the only other expenses will be legal review, but do we have any sense of what sort of staff time would be involved? And I asked this question partly because I was thinking along the lines of Director Nicholson and the public input that, you can do this a couple of ways. One is you could just simply adopt North Cowichan or Ladysmith's bylaw and cross out North Cowichan and write CVRD in crayon or something, but you can also develop one with full community participation and consultation, which theoretically could get very costly in terms of staff time. But also developing the bylaw is one thing, but what additional expenses should we expect related to public education, ensuring compliance, enforcement training, all the supports necessary to sustain a bylaw? Do we have any sense of what the big picture costs would be of developing a bylaw like this?
Mr. Elzinga, we put you into finances position.
Mr. Chair, I will take a shot at the answer to Director Justice. Obviously, our CAO or Mr. Rob Williams may add to this. Just a little bit of background. The genesis really for community services, and especially the Cowichan Community Center taking the lead on the report that you see today, was from a event that was supposed to happen in October of last year. And there was some question around the appropriateness of that event. And so we have been researching and doing some of that legwork since. So we have examined North Cowichan's information, Port Alberni's information, City of Toronto information, and so there's some significant research that has already been done in preparation for the board's direction today. I don't have an overall sense of the dollar figures for all of the aspects that Director Justice has said. So at this point, what we're asking for is committee and board approval of moving forward with the establishment of a bylaw. But as we work our way through that process, other costs may be identified.
Thank you.
Concludes. Thank you. Any more input? Yes, Mr. Elzinga.
And Mr. Chair, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Rob Williams for the amount of work that he's put into this since October of last year in the research and the creation of this report.
Much appreciated. We do have a motion on the floor that's been duly moved in second. Are you ready for the question? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Taking into consideration some of those comments, motion carries. Ms. Harrison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R4, which is a report from the Corporate Services Department regarding outstanding funding requests, and this report is for direction.
Ms. Mohan, welcome. I can say good afternoon because it is now.
I was about to say the same, so thank you, Mr. Chair. You have a report in front of you with a lot of information about outstanding funding requests that were received in 2023 and were meant to be considered potentially in the budget process but weren't. And so I guess there's an addendum on the report or an attachment to the report that talks about the Regional Grant and Aid Program, which was a report given to you last December, just to refresh in terms of where that program status is right now. Subsequent to putting this on the agenda, a few other pieces of information have arisen, and I'll share them with you now. So I realized in the report that it didn't really, the report didn't really highlight any reflection on the criteria that the Strategic Initiatives Fund is to be used for. It's it's actually in the attached report, like the attached report from December, which is really that it was to satisfy policy item number 6 in the policy, which is to allow the board to be flexible and responsible to emerging needs or unique opportunities. So when looking at, what is the one criteria for strategic initiative funding, that's it. And also, I'll say it again, to allow the board to be flexible and responsible to emerging needs or unique opportunities. The other thing that it isn't necessarily expressed in the report is just urgency. So there's really just 2 outstanding requests, Couch and Green Community and Young Agrarians. And I haven't heard from Couch and Green Community, but I am hearing that from the Young Agrarians that a decision today on that funding is important for them to be able to plan their programming for 2024, because if they don't get it, then they have to alter their programming. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing that came up at agenda review is that in the table, it cites a figure of $125,000 of available uncommitted funding for 2024 in the fund. But in fact, there is a closed session committee of the whole resolution that was made 2 weeks ago that is coming up today for your consideration at closed board that would also commit some funds. And so the balance is actually $100,000 that's available should that motion go forward in closed board today. So, and that's just part of a multifaceted item for closed boards.
Thank you very much. More?
Yeah, and then the final item that I wanted to mention is that just in terms of process, it's been a little bit awkward. There's different ways that funding requests for the use of these funds come forward to the board, and one of the ways is through a director at this table bringing it forward. Another is that a delegation or correspondence is received from a community organization, and then at this table, the board refers it to staff for consideration or recommendation. And then the third way is that actually staff bring it forward through a need that's identified to them in the course of their work. And so without actually like recreating the whole regional grant and aid program, which is an option, but if we didn't want to do that, what staff would recommend is that we apply a process that's very similar to how we deal with grants, which is that any grant that we want to apply for has to first come to the senior management table and be approved there before forwarded to the board. And that's to just ensure that that we have capacity to administer a grant, et cetera, and that it's consistent with, work plans and priorities, et cetera. So we could do this at a very preliminary level. We could do the same for requests that come from community organizations that staff are made aware of, that, it must go through senior management team, that it needs to be regional in nature, because this is regional-based funding, not individual electoral area, or it could apply to multiple electoral areas and municipalities, but not single ones. And that it would need to be aligned with the corporate strategic plan priorities. So you've adopted a corporate strategic plan, and we could use that broadly as a lens for qualifying those requests. So, and that would still leave open the possibility that a director would bring a request directly to this table and then refer it back to staff for recommendation, or not, just have it voted on at this table. So. And with that, I'll take questions if you have any.
And I'll give you one. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Barbara. The Cowichan Public Art Gallery Society, it says here the public engagements for the Arts and Culture Master Plan is currently underway. Save me ploughing through that, and I have a very quick look. Is there any numbers in there for financial considerations in that master plan?
No, not yet. I think it's too preliminary. They're
Okay.
doing the engagement, and then they'll do the plan, and then they'll bring it to the board.
Okay.
And then, and then you will be able to evaluate financial concerns at that time.
Good. Thank you very much.
Director Nicholson, and then Director Martman.
I don't really have a question, but I would like to say that I think the grants and aid are a really important opportunity for emerging things, and I really like to see that. And I also think the community can deliver programs that we can't, that are really important. So where we can help out, I'm all for that. And I think the Young Agrarians and the Couch and Green Community are examples of that. But what I also notice about those two particular ones is they keep coming up with this issue of food production and food security, which I think should be a priority in our strategic plan. I believe it is. I don't think we've done any thinking around that, but it seems to me like I would be comfortable providing them with funding this year, but I do think we need to move forward on work around that food production security issue. It is really important because we live on an island and because things are changing so quickly in our environment and with the pressures that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. More of a comment, Director Marmon.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could comment about the Young Agrarian Fund over a 3-year period, because it puts it into the next election cycle. And just wondering if that's appropriate, or anyways, leave it there.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It speaks to something that's reiterated both in the attachment and the main report, which is that we really ought not to give multi-year funding awards. So where there's a request, because we border on questions about service establishment. So really, if you're interested in awarding the young agrarians an amount that might be useful to them over a multi-year period, I would make, as the report recommends, a single 1-year funding and let them worry about whether or not they spread it over 3 years. Yeah, I would hate to embed or commit the board to future funding awards in future budget years. I think that that's not generally what staff like to recommend unless it's unavoidable. So,
follow up, sure.
So, you know, one of the things about staying on budget is sort of tracking it as you go along. And so if you leave it up to an organization, I'm just wondering how far out do you give that before, you know, you sort of lose track, like I would lose track. Is this a budget item? Is not going to be a budget item this year? And this, I guess my concern is 3 years seems to be sort of pushing the umbrella of how far out before you sort of lose track of what are they doing with the money? Because they're supposed to report annually, right? And
correct.
Yeah. So I guess I like the idea of doing it annually, and I'm a little hesitant about giving lump sums. And
yeah, I mean, I think that if that's your preference, then I would suggest giving, I think the request came in 2023, so like giving just $10,000 and having them reapply, right? And then considering the next request in the context of the next budget year, and then giving a 1-year award and then getting them to report again. So the downside of that is also just the time, staff time and board time in the accountability piece. And for the organization, it requires them to report annually. So yeah, there are different ways to slice it. If you prefer to do that, then you could just give a third of it for 2024 and then ask them to come and ask again for a future budget year.
I have Director Segal and then Director Justice.
Okay, so my question, the Strategic Initiatives Fund is funded annually through the budget process. Is that right? Or it's like a part of it, Function 100?
Correct. It's part of Function 100, and the budget amount is deliberated annually. And so in some years, it's been like the $75,000. In some years, unused funds have been rolled forward, or committed funds that where a project hasn't been completed has been rolled forward. So the budget might be bigger than $75,000 in a given year, but usually because there's been rolled over funds from unused from a prior year. Mm-hmm. So, but it's the board's prerogative whether or not to fund it at all or to increase the level of funding. Generally, staff wouldn't recommend increasing the level of this fund because of the accountability factor for how the funds are distributed, and $75,000 is a lot of money. With no process, no application process, no real transparency other than after the decisions are made, kind of on the spending. So
okay, can I have a follow-up?
Follow up, please.
So I guess just what's the difference between establishing a regional grant and aid and just using the Strategic Initiatives Fund?
Through the chair, the eligibility process. So the Regional Grant and Aid Program is a very well-developed, detailed program which outlines eligibility criteria, the kinds of projects the board would like to see. There is public advertisement for submitting your application by a deadline. There's a process for reviewing applications for do they meet the eligibility criteria, and then generally we get sort of more requests than we have money to award. So then there is a rating process around how do you choose, and the board is involved in that usually, and historically it's been at a subcommittee level. So, and you know, the Local Government Act gives us the authority to do all that. It's just that process has been onerous in the past. And despite how often we tried to fine tune it, it still was a very difficult process for everybody involved. And then at a certain point, also the amount of funds there were so large that we put some limits, the policy put some limits on the amount of funds, et cetera. So, yeah, so it's a much more involved process, Regional Grant and Aid, the whole program, and it still exists, like it's there. It's just that no budget has been afforded to it over the last 4 or 5 years. So, so you could, for the upcoming budget year, decide instead of a strategic initiatives fund that you could administer a regional grant and aid process. However, as I've described, the administration of that process is costly in time, staff time. It's a costly process.
Well, first of all, I would encourage you to go into the archives and perhaps watch some of those debates that occurred during the regional recreation or the regional funding, and see if you would like to re-implement that. And a final follow-up.
Okay, so since you mentioned the time sensitivity for the young agrarians, and I believe in sustainable funding, so I like the idea of allocating $30,000 towards the young, so I'd like to make the motion to allocate $30,000 towards Young Agrarian Fund through the Strategic Initiatives Fund.
So that's moved. I have a seconder in Director Wilson. So to the motion. Director Martman to the motion.
I was wondering if staff can tell us how they would recommend the accountability piece.
Through the chair to Director Martman, I believe in the case of the Young Agrarians, there's actually a draft contribution agreement that actually outlines what those responsibilities are, and that portfolio is with Economic Development, and so they would be working with the Young Agrarians to satisfy the conditions, the reporting conditions of that agreement.
Director Morris.
It's follow-up.
Okay, a follow-up, and then I'll come to you, Director
And if they don't, what happens?
Well, I think if they don't, then the board would take that into consideration for any future funding requests. Yeah. So once you've given the money away, it's kind of hard to get it back. But I mean, definitely compliance on those things is something that it's staff responsibility to follow up on and report back if compliance is not being met, and then that influences future decisions. So I do just want to make a comment. Director Segal made a comment about sustainability of funding, but I do want to point out that in the regional grant and aid policy, sustainable funding is actually explicitly something that we don't want to do through that policy. We want to encourage organizations through the policy to get seed funding or project funding and work towards sustainability from other sources. Otherwise, it's service establishment essentially. So, yeah.
Do you believe this resolution should go to this afternoon's board meeting? Just for timing?
I would recommend that, yes, yeah.
Okay, so noted, that is appropriate with the mover and the seconder. I do have Director Morrison online.
That was my point, Mr. Chair, and but I do have comments after this resolution if I can stay on the list.
Okay, who did I have next? Director Justice.
If I understood the finances correctly, I think if we granted $30,000 to the Young Agrarians, there wouldn't be enough for consideration of the request from the Cowichan Green community. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Director Justice, that's correct, for the entire amount that they requested. And just to be clear, they did request that amount on an annual basis, and what I've put in the report is a recommendation that if you're going to consider it for an annual, like one-time award. But the board is also free to award a lesser amount, right? Like you don't have to give the full amount of what was asked for by the organization. You could award a lesser amount too.
Thank you.
Back to you, Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I can save folks having to go back into the archives. This board years ago decided to get out of the regional grant and aid business. At least that's my recollection of it. Yeah, those were wild meetings and lots of fun was had by all, but given what Ms. Mohan has said in regards to the ongoing funding requests that we were getting and the challenging meetings, we chose to get out of the regional grant and aid business. We have strategic initiatives, and a point that I don't believe I've heard it mentioned, and by the way, can I ask everybody to speak really closely into your microphone? At least it's loud enough to hear the 60% of what I'm getting. The strategic initiatives has been for those unexpected but very high priority items that come forward through the year. It's always been the safety cushion since we got out of the regional grant and aid business. So I'm really uncomfortable with sort of scope creep of regional grant and aid back into the strategic initiatives. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that was sort of a conscious decision made by previous boards to drop the regional grant and aid as a function, have the strategic initiative dollars there in the event that there was something that the board deemed a priority. So having said that, I'm supportive of the young agrarians and was hoping that we could see whether there were sufficient operating funds or funds in the economic development function number, which I don't have right in front of me, but that was a question that I wanted to pose as opposed to from strategic initiatives, because it really kind of doesn't meet the criteria. And in regards to CGC, like I think every dollar that we invest in Couch and Green communities is a great return, but not appropriate to come through strategic initiatives. And I think Ms. Mohan has already said that the kind of dollars they're talking about and the regular nature of it, that speaks to it becoming a function or a service. So at this point, I'm not supportive of the CGC from strategic initiatives, and would hope that if we as a board agree, or as committee agree to recommend to the board that the young agrarians be funded, that we look at whether there's sufficient funds in ECDEV, because I think it resides there in their economic development portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mohan, response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through the Director Morrison. I think the report makes reference to a second request that came from young agrarians that was accommodated through the economic development budget. So I can only assume, but maybe Mr. Pultings can confirm, that the reason this request was for this source of funding was because the other sources of funding available in the economic development budget were exhausted for, is that right? Yeah, okay. That's the reason. So there isn't any other room in the economic development budget. So I also, just upon thinking, would like to revise my answer to Director Justice around there not being enough funds left for the entirety of the Couch and Green community request. As I mentioned, there is a recommendation from Committee of the Whole from a prior meeting 2 weeks ago that the board needs to address in closed board this afternoon. So technically those funds aren't committed yet. So I just would hate for you to not be aware of that before deciding on amounts. So, but there isn't, how about, there isn't enough room in the fund for all three. Yeah.
Thanks for the clarity, not mentioning the one that's enclosed. Director Wilson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Director Morrison does bring up some good points, and I'm glad that you've clarified that there isn't enough money in ECDEV to cover this. Thank you, Barbara. But one of the most telling things to me anyway is on page 2 of the report, which says recipients become dependent instead of leveraging the funds to become self-sustainable. That's a fairly important point, because I had a similar situation in Area C where we were basically funding one thing, and we said in the end, look, you guys need to get out and start leveraging, which they did, which is great. So that's good. But one of the other things here, it says the board struggles to follow its own policy. That's a fairly telling one as well. So I'll leave it at that. There wasn't really a question there, was there?
I'm happy to comment. It was a diplomatic choice on my part, but I think that the reference has been made to going back and looking at the videos of those meetings and understanding the struggle that people had advocating for their communities in competition with other requests is very difficult, yeah.
Director Nicholson.
Yeah, so the motion on the floor is about funding $30,000 for the young agrarians. So my question about that in particular is, how many years have we been providing them with funds for this program?
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, and happy to be corrected by Mr. Postings, but I don't believe this particular funding request has been funded in the past. It's the other one. We've had several single-year awards of $10,000, and that's also recently just been confirmed by the board. So that's one program that year over year the board has chosen to commit $10,000 to. But this is a different program, a new program that for the $30,000. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm unclear. I thought their program was about land matching. I thought this was about land matching.
So one is about land matching, but the other one is a little bit more developed program, I think, involving some hiring actually of a temporary or partial funding of a position. So you'd have to go back to the original report, but.
Well, I guess my point is that.
They're separate requests, I guess, yeah.
Right, but we have supported the young agrarians on this land matching program, and you need capacity in order to do that. And to expect them, this is a very specific kind of a program, to expect them to reach some sustainable way of bringing funds in other than from government support, because this is an issue that we are facing about trying to encourage farming on unused land, I don't think is realistic. So it takes me back to this problem that I think we haven't done our work on this issue of food production and food security. And if we had done that, we would have, I anticipate that we would probably need to go forward with a request to the electorate, asking them whether they wanted to actually fund this kind of programming on an ongoing basis. And I think we should be thinking about doing that at the next election. But in the meantime, we have two organizations that we have sort of supported in the past, and I'm not clear on how much we need to do to support them till we work out what we want to do on that front. Because for me, particularly the Green, they're both big players in that our need to address that issue, but we haven't explored all the options. We haven't done all the thinking on this, and maybe this is great, but so from my perspective, what we're asking is interim funding. And yes, I agree, it's not right in line with our strategic whatever, but this is an opportunity to keep these organizations afloat, doing good work while we have those conversations. So I am supportive of this motion, but I do think we need to really take some time and look at it, because maybe there are better ways of spending funding for food production, food security issues than these particular ones. And so I would like to just like to say that again.
Speaking of food production, lunch was here quite a while ago, but we have a motion on the floor. Are you ready for the question? I don't think we had endorsement, did we? We have not voted on it. Yes, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification on the recommendation that's before you on the floor, because there were a lot of different friendly amendments going on. Could I just restate it for clarification and the members?
Yes, so noting that there is no friendly amendment.
So the recommendation before you is that $30,000 be provided through the Strategic Initiative Funds, Function 100 General Government, to support the Young Agrarians BC Land Matching Program. Is that correct? Okay. In the Cowichan region. And is it still subject to the deliverables that were outlined in the previous, okay, so subject to the deliverables outlined in the June 14th, 2023 staff report.
And sent to board. today,
Yes.
and it will be. So that is the clarification. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Who's opposed?
We don't report it.
We don't unless, yeah, it's committee. We will ask for that at board. Anything else, Ms. Mohan, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the requests for funding that has found an alternate source outside of the Strategic Initiatives funds is the VICC use of LG CAP funding, Local Government Climate Action Plan funding, for participation in the VICC Climate Leadership Steering Committee. And so staff would appreciate confirmation of direction to use the LG CAP funding for that funding request.
Director Nicholson, you're moving that?
I move that.
Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Director Segal. Discussion on that? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Director Nicholson.
I would also like to move that we provide $30,000 to the Couch and Green community to continue the good work that they do on providing food security in the community.
And seconded by Director Justice with the same intent of moving that to this afternoon's board.
I could not hear the motion.
It is to afford $30,000 to the Cowich and Green community from the same source of funding. Any input? I think that's been discussed previously with the previous topic. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you very much. That carries. Ms. Harrison. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Nicholson.
Well, while we're on this topic, I was wondering if we could ask the Public Art Gallery folks to come back and give us an update on where they're at, because from my perspective, that is a strategic emerging issue that we potentially might want to help them. I know they have a large funding ask, but I think just actually keeping their program, keeping what they're doing going so that they can potentially realize a public art gallery would be a good thing.
I appreciate that. If staff could accommodate that at some point. Ms. Miles Wilson will come forward.
Just for clarity, because we talked about it a little earlier in the meeting, would you like to wait until you've received the Arts and Culture Master Plan to put that into context, or are you talking about prior to that?
Yeah, I realize that that's what we were going to do, but if we could provide them with $10,000 to help them keep their doors open while they develop their, and then the plan happens, then that would be, I think, a good thing for the community, because they are opening, they do operate a public art gallery in town.
So at some point in the near future, we would welcome them back for an update. Perfect. Now Ms. Harrison has vacated, so
I apologize.
here she comes.
Clarifying with
Oh, clarifying. Next, Ms. Harrison.
The next item on the agenda is item R5, which is a report from Sport Tourism Event and Subcommittee Sport Tourism Event Grants. And there is a recommendation with 15 points before you.
So I look at Mr. Elzinga, but also Krishdash, Director Ishdash, as a tag team effort here, perhaps?
If I may start, Mr. Chair, and then obviously turn it over to Director Estash, who is a member of the committee, the Sport Tourism Event Grant Committee. For 7 years, I've stood in front of you to explain the allocations that have been decided by the committee. However, the recent Sport Tourism Coordinator, Vicki Holman, has retired, and the capacity was found within economic development. So I'm really thankful for the efforts of Nicole Rallis, who is in our economic development office and is now spearheading this Sport Tourism Event Grant. Mr. Chair, she's online if there's any specific questions.
Director Wilson, you had your hand up.
I did, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. What's a fondo?
So here is Director Ishdash to present these numbers that have been afforded the sport tourism grants.
Quickly on that to Director Wilson, it's a gravel bike race that extends over 150 kilometers. The Fonda was a reference for 100 kilometers, so races in excess of 100 kilometers of that. This race probably, I think, brings in excess near up to 500 people regularly to the Glenora region. To be quick, because of the time we're at, I just really, first off with this, I do look for the board for the recommendation here, and letting know that there was a really good diversity in age, type of activity, location, and the gender of all the type of sports that were supported in here. But I also want to point out how quick our meeting was. And the reason those meetings are quick, though, is because the staff do an incredible job, and over the years, and in part with Mr. Elzinga and now transitioning over to ECDAV Cowichan, is because they've developed this really robust spreadsheet that answers absolutely everything and a full scoring criteria. And because of that, our entire committee was almost a full consensus on what we each in our own time came up with funding amounts. So when we got to the board and the staff took those and provided an aggregate overview, we were actually almost all on the same page. And I think we were on the same page because of the quality of data provided. So just wanted to share that. The grants are all straightforward, and yeah, there's a Fondo in there, but there's also a strongman competition this year. So I look to the board to approve this recommendation from the committee.
Thank you, and Director Wilson and I will be involved in the strongman.
Exactly, that's what I was going to suggest. You and me, Tim, will be there.
So it's a great geographical representation and a great sport representation. Moved by Director Ishdash, seconded by Director Segal. Any input? Call a question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. And moving on, I believe we're going to Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is unfinished business. We have none. New business, we have none. And then question period.
Question period, please. Good afternoon again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kim Bernard, I'll make this quick. My question is, how can we facilitate a respectful rapport, a conduit of constant communication between the public and our elected officials? And I'm wondering, as a follow-up question, if the role of the alternate directors and perhaps the administrative assistants could be put to a fulsome use in that, so that there's not a bottleneck, not an emotion-charged bottleneck, that instead it's a friendly rapport. Thank you.
I think we all look for respectful spaces for communication. Some of us choose different routes to do that. An alternate opposed to a municipal council could be an alternative. And I will look directly to Director Acton, whose population exceeds the town of Lake Cowichan by almost threefold. So by herself trying to communicate to all must be difficult. I have 4 other cohorts that can help me with communication as I delegate certain aspects of that. So hopefully utilizing an alternate could be an option within there.
Thank you very much.
And I'm not telling her what to do, but that's just, but I do appreciate your concern. Thank you very much. Ms. Harrison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is the adjournment.
Everybody moves, everybody seconds. Call the question, all in favor? Clayco, Heichka, thank you very much, staff, fellow directors. Meeting is adjourned.
Sorry, we're trying to work out the recommendations that have to land on the next agenda.
I could have taken over.
That's okay. That's all right. It's fine. Thank you.